F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
It's round 4 of the 2024 Formula One season as we return much earlier than usual to everyone's favourite circuit on the calendar, Suzuka in Japan. And after disturbed running on Friday with rain disrupting much of free practice 2, we head into the final practice session ahead of us with a lot of unknowns before we get into qualifying later on today. Guiding you through all the action is myself, Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is racing driver Alice Powell and BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. And Alice, well, Verstappen topped the one and only dry session we've had so far in FP1. Piastri topped the wet session yesterday in FP2, but it was a bit of a weird session yesterday, wasn't it? Because it wasn't quite wet enough for the dry tyre, but it wasn't quite dry enough for the intermediate tyre.
Yeah, it's one of those frustrating sessions of a driver where you're desperate to just get some mileage under your belt. Certainly Daniel Ricciardo, who missed free practice 1 because Amuma Iwasa was in for him in free practice 1. So yeah, it's a frustrating session because you go out on track and you go, oh, it looks fairly wet, and then you get certainly halfway around the circuit. It was for these drivers, and it was almost sort of fairly dry in sector 2, halfway through sector 2 and sector 3, and then it was a little bit too wet for slicks in the first sector. So we did get to see a few laps in the end, didn't we, with some drivers opting to go out on the slick tyre, go out on the softest compound that we've got available here this weekend, which is the C3 tyre. Then we've got the C2 and the C1. So yeah, we got a few laps, but it was nothing that was meaningful.
Do you think something needs to change there with the allocation in tyres, particularly if it turns out to be a wet Friday?
I mean, we'll let Andrew probably have he's probably got a better opinion on me of this, but I think that it's just one of those. How often do we get? It's the same for any category, really. If you do get occasionally these sessions where it happens to not be wet enough for wets and dry enough for the slicks, it's just one of those things, unfortunately.
Ironically, one of the reasons that happened yesterday was something has changed this year. I won't go into the detail because I'm not even sure I understand it myself, but there's some ridiculousness about handing tyres back and how many tyre sets they've got. Yeah. So I read out the wrong numbers of tyres because I got used over the years to having 4 sets of inters and 3 sets of wets. It now turns out to be 5 sets of inters and 2 sets of wets, but there's some other thing about handing them back or not handing them back after P2. And anyway, that's the reason why they didn't run yesterday. I mean, and I saw one of the leading engineers at Pirelli suggesting some change which seemed to make it even more complicated. I thought, just give them more wet tyres would be the obvious answer, but anyway.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I believe Pirelli are wanting some talks with F1 and FIA over those tyre rulings and then trying to make more running happen.
And I can imagine, given the effectiveness of the normal talks between the FIA and F1 and Pirelli, F1 not exactly thrilled about that prospect, but
I'm not sure we'll get an answer on that too soon.
13 years to be asking them to have tyres that don't thermally degrade. Here we still are.
We'll keep you up to date with all of that and the talks as they happen. But the good news is today it is not raining. It is dry. It's even a little bit sunny. It's a bit cooler though than the temperatures are used to seeing for the Japanese Grand Prix. Of course, normally held the last few years in October, in the latter half of the season. We've shifted it much earlier in the year now to April. Air temperature 17.1 degrees. Track temperature 25.4 degrees as we get ready for the final FP3 session. Drivers in their cars getting strapped in by their engineers and having those last conversations with their engineers before they get in. Let's bring you up to speed with how the drivers and constructors standings are looking ahead of this weekend. It's Max Verstappen, who has won the first 2 races of the year, but of course retired in Australia, still leads with 51 points to his name. He's got a 4-point gap over Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, who is second. Sergio Perez is third, in front of Carlos Sainz, and Oscar Piastri rounds out the top 5. In the Constructors' Championship, it is Red Bull who lead the way, 97 points to their name, with a 4-point gap over Ferrari. Then it's McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, the top 5. And in the scrap for the lower end of the field, that's headed up by RB at the moment, in front of Haas, with Williams, Sauber and Alpine, the bottom 3 teams, yet to get off the mark. Engines firing up then as we get ready for this last 1 hour session of practice before we get into qualifying later on. Qualifying will be live on 5 Sports Extra at 7 o'clock this morning, so make sure you've got plenty of coffee or caffeine to keep you awake for that. But green light at the end of the pit lane, and it's Max Verstappen in the Red Bull who is ready to go and is first out on track, up through the gears, feeds out of the pit lane exit and down through turns 1 and 2. 59 minutes, 42, 41 and 40 seconds remain of this session, and there is a gaggle of cars out straight away with the Sauber of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu, along with Sergio Perez's Red Bull, and Kevin Magnussen in the Haas also out there on track. And the grandstands are absolutely packed. There were smiling faces yesterday despite the lack of running, but the smiles are even wider today, Alice, already.
They just always seem to be smiling here, and we were talking, just before we come on air, how much they must spend on the outfits. You've got quite a lot of people in the crowd there with you often see it in Japan, the cool model hats of F1 cars, but some people are actually in a full race suit, boots, and what looks like to me an actual proper helmet, and then of course they're not cheap to buy, but everyone is quickly heading out of the pit lane. I expect it to be a very busy session, certainly with the running that we missed yesterday. Obviously a lot of people would have had plenty of plans to run through during practice yesterday, as of course they always do, but due to the weather they weren't able to do so. So it will be very busy, Harry, and everyone's hoping that we'll get the full running of this session. Of course, we did have a stoppage, didn't we, in free practice 1?
We certainly did, and that was due to the Williams of Logan Sargent, who crashed coming up through Degner Curve in what he described as a silly error, and there was quite a bit of damage to that car, although crucially the chassis was okay after the incident, of course, in Australia, where Alex Albon's chassis was damaged beyond repair, and so Logan Sargent had to sit that one out. That chassis was then taken back to Grove, Williams' base, and repaired back out in Japan, but still belonging to Logan Sargent. There was no damage to Sargent's fronts and the rear end, along with the gearbox as well. This is the sound of Nico Hülkenberg just making his way up through the first sector of the lap, through Degner Curve, where Sargent had that off. And we've also just seen images of Lando Norris strolling in the paddock, so not even in his garage yet. So a rather delayed start for Lando Norris in his McLaren. 11 cars out on track at the moment, with a mixture of the medium, soft, and Alex Albon's actually gone out on the hard compound of tyres. So, as you say, Alice, there's going to be a lot of crucial running in this. It does get all condensed down. How do the engineers and the teams manage that overnight? Is it just a carryover with what they missed in FP2, or how do they combine what they want to run what they wanted to run in FP2 whilst also doing their FP3 running?
So, a matter of importance, really.
Oh, we got an off for one of the Haas cars coming through the hairpin. That's Kevin Magnussen. And he's managed to rejoin the track. Yellow flag, but that's quickly gone back to a green again as he gets back up and running. A lot of dirt picked up on his tyres. He ran off onto the grass and into the gravel. Haven't quite seen how that incident occurred. Doesn't look like he's got any big damage, but he's slowing right down just to let his teammate get round the outside of him as he now makes his way through the double left-hander of Spoon Curve, turns 13 and 14. So an early off for Kevin Magnussen there.
It's still a little bit patchy from some rain that's fallen overnight, so we're just getting a replay. So coming into turn 11, and he just loses the rear ever so slightly on entry. Cold tyres still by the looks of it to me.
Lucky not to get beached, actually, in the gravel.
He's very lucky. So the sound you can hear is now riding on board as we're just watching the replay. Didn't snatch a front, thought he had the grip, went to turn in, and the rear said, no, not at this moment, mate. And then just about managed to crawl himself out of the gravel. But actually, interestingly, while we were talking about Sargent's off yesterday, Hülkenberg had a little bit of a moment and a snatch of the front heading down into sort of turn 2. So maybe that's a trend. The Haas is struggling possibly to build temperature in their tyres, but
is that his tyres done now as well for Magnussen?
Well, it wasn't a very big spin, and he never locked up a front either, so he should, for his sake, touch wood, escape any severe damage to those tyres. But track temperature is around about 24 degrees, which is slightly warmer than, of course, what we had yesterday in free practice 2, and actually slightly warmer than how free practice 1 ended. And the air temperature is around about 17 degrees. The sound you can hear now is Lewis Hamilton. He is on the soft tyre, fastest of anybody in the first sector, but not fastest in the middle sector, as he just makes his way past a little bit of traffic and now into the final chicane. Just carrying a little bit too much speed though, missing that apex at turn 16. Usually see the drivers really abuse the curb there, but Hamilton just sailed on past it. However, didn't slow him down too much. He jumps up to the top of the times.
So he had a bit of a moment through Spoon there, Alice, didn't he? He had a couple of oversteer moments as he was coming through the second part of Spoon, which is a sort of long downhill double left-hander that leads onto the back straight towards 130R. So that will have definitely affected him. It was quite a long run all the way up the hill there. But yesterday Mercedes had a really good day. Hamilton was saying that it was the best day they've had with the best session they've had with this car. Here's some radio from Verstappen.
My mirrors are vibrating quite a bit.
Understood.
Okay, thanks, Max. His mirrors are vibrating, but we'll have to wait and see. There was still half a second nearly off Verstappen's pace, so I don't think Mercedes are expecting any massive step forward, but obviously it was encouraging, at least for Hamilton and Russell, to feel that the car felt good at least, which it hasn't really been doing so since the start of the season.
Absolutely. Still more optimism coming from Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, but yeah, certainly the best the car has felt all year, as you say, is what Hamilton said after FP1. But I mean, as we were talking about just before Magnussen went off into the gravel, about what the run plan would be for this session, how it is suddenly condensed. So speak of Mercedes and Hamilton had a great FP1, but of course them, along with everybody else, didn't really get any running FP2, so that puts everybody on the back foot for this session.
No, it certainly does. Everyone is in the same boat in that sense, but it's a matter of priority and importance, really. Obviously, qualifying is the next session up, so you will use this session to dial in, really dial in the car and make sure you've got the best car possible heading into the next session. And also, you want decent race pace. As we see, Max Verstappen is out there on the medium tyre, same with Perez, Leclerc. You've got a number of them that are opting to start this session on the medium tyre, and then you've got others that are opting to start on the soft tyre.
It's interesting because they were saying, the drivers yesterday after the two practice sessions at the soft, is basically a one-lap tyre. You can't do a second lap on it. It's done basically after one lap. That's even though it's sort of soft this weekend is the C3, which is the middle tyre of the Pirelli range. Just goes to show just how demanding Suzuka is on tyres with these long, fast corners, which are basically the entire track is like that pretty much, apart from the hairpin and even the hairpin's quite a long corner, isn't it, Alice? But apart from the chicane, which are the only two short duration corners on the track, basically, is the chicane.
Yeah, we did see a couple of drivers yesterday, didn't we, in free practice 1 on the soft tyre, try and do essentially a push lap and then a cool lap to see if there was any life left in the tyre, if they can recover anything from them to then go for that next sort of push. But no one really improved, so it certainly matches up with the driver's comments. As the sound you can hear now is Charles Leclerc, who crosses the line, jumps up into P4, half a second off Lewis Hamilton's time. Hamilton, of course, on the soft tyre, so relative to those around him, Max Verstappen on the medium tyre, he's a good few tenths off.
The other thing yesterday was that Ferrari were quite pleasantly surprised by how close they were to the Red Bull on pace. Carlos Sainz arrived in Japan on Thursday and was saying, let's not forget, we were 7 to 8 tenths off Red Bull at this race like last year. He thinks it's 4 or 5 months ago. Is Perez's radio?
What the again, the drivability. Have a look, please.
Perez saying, not happy with the drivability of his Red Bull, wanting the team to have a look again, Andrew.
Yeah, that'll be engine settings, I think, probably on the Honda engine. As I was saying about Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, I think it was 4 or 5 months ago. It's more like 7, actually, since we were last in Japan. But so the thing is, obviously, the Ferrari have made a big change to this car, and one of the differences they've wanted to make with it is to make it more drivable, more friendly, because last year's car was a bit on a knife edge and unpredictable, and so they expected to be closer to Red Bull this weekend than they were in Suzuka last September, but they didn't expect to be that close. So, I mean, we haven't had qualifying yet, so we don't know. But they, at least, Sainz and Charles Leclerc, his teammate, were both pretty encouraged by how close they were to the Red Bull on pace yesterday in the one session that they got.
Do you think it's also encouraging as well that in the one session we got, Sergio Perez was within 0.2 of Verstappen at a track that he got absolutely trounced at by Verstappen last year?
Well, not if you want somebody to be between the Red Bulls. No.
But for himself, at least, encouraging,
I guess. Yeah, but I mean, look, is he going to beat Verstappen? No. So does it really matter?
Well, I suppose not. 49 minutes and 6 seconds remain of FP3. Here is Perez.
I'm traveling a lot in the low speed. The ride in the low speed is quite cool.
Okay, let's keep up the pace and we'll box this lap.
Perez struggling in the low speed corners and talking to his engineer Hugh Bird there. So Perez currently third. It's Hamilton fastest, Verstappen, then Perez.
Another thing to note as today starts is that the Aston Martins are both in the same upgraded specification today. Yesterday, Aston Martin brought a pretty big upgrade to the car this weekend. It's got revised side pods, which look very like a Red Bull's, and a new floor and floor edge. The floor edge, those little curls and flicks that you see sort of halfway along the floor, they're really, really important in the overall airflow of the car. They sort of scavenge some of the air out of the floor and help the downforce that the underbody creates. Those are new on the Aston Martin this weekend as well. Lance Stroll was the only guy who had them yesterday. They wanted to do a back-to-back comparison with the cars, and obviously Daddy's boy got them, but now the proper drivers got them as well, so we're okay.
That's one way to put it.
just about
Harry's
to cross
like,
the
how do I
line
pick
now.
up from this?
Sorry, just crossing the line now. Logan Sargent goes 14th fastest in the Williams, and not Daddy's boy Fernando Alonso just slides up to 6th fastest on the hard compounded tyre in the Aston Martin. 47 minutes and 35 seconds remain. Hamilton fastest on the soft compounded tyre, set at 1:30.065, 10th and a half ahead of Verstappen on the medium tyre. Then comes Perez, Leclerc, Bottas the top 5, Alonso, Sainz, Zhou, Tsunoda, Ricciardo in the top 10, Stroll, Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Albon, Sargent the top 15, and then Russell 16th and last of the timed runners, with Piastri on an outlap at the moment, his McLaren. Still no sign of the McLaren of Lando Norris, who was quite a late starter even to get into the garage this morning. Then the two Alpines as well, Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, have not ventured out onto the track yet, so we'll try and find out what's going on down at Alpine and in McLaren too for their slightly delayed start. This is the sound of Sergio Perez just making his way through 130R and now into the braking zone of the final chicane, gearing up to try and set himself up for a lap. Meanwhile, his teammate Max Verstappen on the medium compounder tyre at the moment rips off a visor from his tear off from his visor on his helmet and make sure it tries to get out of the way and not get sucked into the side inlets as he now makes his way into the braking zone for that final chicane.
So just have zero confidence in the car.
That's Alex Albon on the radio for Williams, saying he has zero confidence in the car. He's 14th at the moment. His teammate Logan Sargent down in 15th. Williams have brought some upgrades this weekend, mainly in the form of wings to the front and the rear. But of course, well, confidence low perhaps in that team overall after Australia, and particularly with Logan Sargent, perhaps after his off in FP1. Williams struggling at the moment, it seems, Andrew.
Well, zero confidence in the car is not what you want around the most demanding circuit on the Formula One calendar. The cars are in slightly different specs today. After Logan Sargent's crash yesterday, Williams basically had new front and rear wings and a new beam wing, which is the bit sort of the bottom part of the rear wing. Sargent hasn't got some of those, but James Vowles has just been saying on some other TV channel that people might have heard of that the difference in pace between the cars is, in theory, is milliseconds, so not that big a deal for Sargent, but it is beginning to look like that Williams is not a particularly friendly car. Albon's crash in Melbourne, it jumped more than he was expecting it to jump on the curb at turn 6, which is, to be fair, a pretty fast corner, and these cars do have hard suspension and ground effects, so maybe it could just be an error, but here we are 2 weeks later in Japan, and he's now got zero confidence at Suzuka. It's not looking that good for Williams, and let's bear in mind that they also, like Ferrari, have had a big philosophy change. Here's Perez's radio again.
Saying the drivability was a lot better on that lap, so working on improving that throughout the session so far is Sergio Perez and Red Bull.
We didn't get Perez's radio there, did we?
No, I think that was one of those ones where it just comes up written rather than you actually get the audio.
So I didn't get the bleeps.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. Amateur broadcasting here at 3:30 in the morning or whatever it is. If I say everyone, I don't know how many people are listening at the moment at 3:30 in the morning. What was I saying? Williams,
all
yes.
The Kinos.
Williams, they, for the last few years, their cars basically, and we've got an off.
And it's Daniel Ricciardo, and he's currently making his way back round, facing the right direction. That's coming up through turns 1 and 2, isn't it?
Yeah, 4, 5, around there.
Yeah, just before you head uphill through the S's. He's found himself onto the grass. He's done a little 360 and has made his way back onto the track. No damage seemingly to that car, but the tyres covered in a lot of grass and muck now as he now makes his way up through Dunlop.
Yeah, that actually looked like that might have been turn 5.
I think he was before then. It looks like was it out of turn 2?
I think it was out of turn 2. We're just getting the replay now. Down into turns 1 and 2, turns it in, double right-hander, plunges you downhill, and just as he's coming out of the exit of turn 2, loses the rear, and round he goes, 2 360s into the grass.
You don't see many accidents there. You really don't.
Curious.
He ran. I mean, I had to see that again, whether there's a little bit of water on the curb, maybe, and he just, but I think he actually lost it before then. But actually, I was going to point out earlier, Max Verstappen was having a bit of a wobble going through the final corner, which turn 18, which certainly in an F1 car is a corner. So due to the amount of rain that we have had, the track seems really, really green, and with obviously the current temperatures as well, 17.3 is the track temperature, gone up slightly.
I have no rear support, 0.
Okay, so that's interesting. That's Logan Sargent. That's basically the same message as Alex Albon, isn't it, Alice? No rear support, but equals no confidence, effectively.
Yeah, and as you said, you don't want to be going around this incredible Suzuka circuit with not having confidence in the car at all, but it just seems like there's just no grip out there at the moment. So of course, the more running that drivers will be doing, more cars that will circulate, will lay some rubber down, will increase the track's grip, but at the moment, not too many happy drivers out there with their cars.
No, and let's just to be absolutely clear about what Logan Sargent and Alex Albon are saying, Alice, about that thing: zero confidence and no support from the rear. They're both basically saying that when they turn into the corner, it feels like the car's going to snap around on them and spin pretty much everywhere they go. That's the translation, isn't it?
Yeah, 100% is, as Lando Norris, he's on the soft tyre at the moment, sitting down in 19th place. No time set, but that'll change very soon as he heads down into the final section of corners. Currently a 10.5 off Lewis Hamilton's time, which has also been set on the soft tyre as he comes out now through turn 18. No wobbles there, jumps up only into P3, which I would say McLaren be slightly disappointed with that. Certainly that Hamilton's lap was fairly early on, at least I would say a good 15 minutes ago, and we've got quite a few cars going around the track, so I'd say they'd be fairly disappointed, especially for someone that had a good result here last year, Harry.
Yeah, double podiums last year for Norris and Piastri. The birthday boy today. Happy birthday, Oscar Piastri. Turns 23 years old and took his maiden podium about 7 months ago. This time for the Japanese Grand Prix last year. But a bit of a slow start for Lando Norris's session as well for the two Alpines. They have all now been out. Ocon down in 17th with Gasly down in 14th too. But Andrew, I suppose, could you run us through the technical changes that have happened coming into this weekend with regards to McLaren?
Oh, the personnel.
The personnel shuffle. Well, the one shuffle.
How long have you got?
40 minutes.
Basically, the headline is that David Sanchez, who they'd poached from Ferrari and he'd been on about a year's gardening leave, he's left after just 3 months, which is really unusual. What they're saying is that by the time he got to McLaren, the role that he thought he was going to be doing was much smaller than it appeared to be when they first recruited him. So he wasn't satisfied with that. And he wanted to leave. And Andrea Stella, who used to work with David Sanchez at Ferrari back in the day before Andrea Stella came to McLaren in the end of 2014 with Fernando Alonso, or at the same time as Fernando Alonso, because he was his race engineer at Ferrari. He recruited Sanchez basically, and he let him go, which is not a normal thing to do. Sanchez isn't on any gardening leave. He can join another team if he can find a job whenever he wants. Now, it's interesting because it's effectively quite a big structural change too, because what Stella did, and they announced it about a year ago now, they've introduced a sort of unusual technical structure where they basically had 3 technical directors for the 3 areas of performance definers of a Formula 1 car. So that's aerodynamics, performance, which is like how everything else in the car interacts with the aerodynamics, and then engineering, which is the making of the car once those 2 people have decided on the sort of the theory of the car. And David Sanchez was the performance guy. But at the same time as recruiting him, they also recruited a guy called Rob Marshall from Red Bull. Now, Rob Marshall was the chief designer at Red Bull, so Adrian Newey's right-hand man, basically, when Sebastian Vettel was dominating Formula 1 from 2010 to 2014, and after that for a while, although Marshall had been off Formula 1 projects for the last few years. Now, what seems to have happened is that in the intervening period between recruiting Sanchez and Marshall, which was basically at the same time, they've played around with the operations of the team, and they found a way to make it work in a way that have shrunk that job that Sanchez was going to do. And so he basically wasn't required anymore, which means that they've now got a much more formal structure. They still don't have a technical director as such. They've still got Peter Pedromu, who's running aerodynamics, and a guy called Neil Holdley, who's running engineer performance. And Rob Marshall's job title has changed as well. He's no longer technical director engineering, he's now chief designer. Now, I haven't dug into what the relevance of that is, but anyway, that's a rather long-winded explanation as we see Alex Albon tail as sliding and drifting out of Degner 2, which is again not something you really want to be doing, because that's a very tricky corner with the wall very, very close on the outside. But here's Ocon's radio.
No, look at the bouncing a little bit. I think it's increased.
Okay, understood. We'll check that.
That's Ocon talking about the bouncing that he's experiencing, especially this is the sound of him on the run down to 130R. You can see the helmet bobbing up and down. You can hear the bottom of the floor just touching the surface of the track. Asking the team to look into that, Andrew.
Yeah, so just to finish up on this McLaren thing, it's still a slightly unusual structure because Andrea Stella, although he's team principal, he's effectively technical director as well. Zach Brown, the McLaren Racing CEO, calls him a technical team principal. And I guess that's because Brown does quite a lot of the team principal-y type stuff that normal team principal people do, like commercial things and speaking in press conferences. Not that Stoller doesn't do that, the speaking in press conferences things, but the things that Toto Wolff and Christian Horner, for example, do at Mercedes and Red Bull, Andrea Stella doesn't do quite a lot of that, which frees him up a lot of time to focus more on the technical side, which makes sense because that's what he is. He's an engineer, and he's an absolutely exceptional engineer in terms of his communication and empathy and human sensitivities. He's one of the most interesting people in Formula One to talk to. He's so eloquent, and he has this mellifluous voice that you could listen to Andrea Stella talk all day.
After when in Bahrain this year, I got my first proper experience with him at the commentators briefing he does, and I need that man every day just to give me his insights. He's awesome. Absolutely
really
spectacular.
Yeah, I realise I'm talking a lot here. I'm sorry about that. There's not a lot going on track while they do their sort of race runs.
I'm happy. You keep going, yeah.
Because Andrea Stella for a long time didn't really talk to the media, and when he was at Ferrari, he was nice enough if you tried to talk to him, but he basically told you to go away. And it was the same when he started at McLaren, and then in 2018 when Fernando Alonso was leaving Formula One, which we didn't know it was for the first time, but it was, as it turned out. I did this sort of big, it was meant to be one article, it turned out to be 5, about his career, or certain aspects of his career, and I needed something to sort of tie it all together. And I thought I'd try to talk to Andrea Stella, because he'd been with him for so much of his career, and McLaren, thanks to them, they set it up for me, and I'd never spoken to him really before, other than to say, will you talk, and him to say no. And we sat down in Brazil at the end of 2018, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. It was one of the best interviews I've ever done. It was nothing to do with me. It was all to do with the level of his insight was just absolutely incredible. Taught me so much about Fernando Alonso in just 20 minutes or something.
I've got a lot of understeer.
Okay, understood.
That's Verstappen reporting that he's got quite a lot of understeer back to his engineer. So currently on track, as we've been chatting away about the McLaren technical structure as it currently stands, and their team principal Andrea Stella, there's a bit of long running going on out on track really, as teams try and make up for the lack of running due to the rain in yesterday's free practice 2 session. Also, just on the McLaren situation as well, as a sort of sideways look, Emanuele Pirro has also left the team. He was director of the driver development program for McLaren. That's now been taken over and absorbed with Stephanie Carlin, who moved into a role there with McLaren at the end of last year and at the beginning of this season. So some changes going on behind the scenes there at McLaren. Norris 3rd, Piastri 4th as it currently stands. 33 minutes and 2:10 seconds remain of FP3. It's Hamilton fastest. He set that lap on the soft tyre quite early on in this session, a 1:30.65, a tenth ahead of Max Verstappen, who set his lap time on the medium compounder tyre. Norris, Piastri, Perez the top 5. Then it's Leclerc, Tsunoda, Bottas, Alonso, Sainz the top 10. Zhou, Ricciardo, Stroll, Gasly, Hülkenberg the top 15. Ocon, Sargent, Albon, Magnussen, and George Russell currently 20th and last. He has done 15 laps though, and on an outlap at the moment on the medium compounder tyre. This is the sound of Fernando Alonso making his way up through Dunlop curve. He's out there on the hard tyre at the moment as he comes through Degner 1, then braking into the right-hander of Degner 2. Not quite rally-style exit that Alex Albon had to endure a few moments ago as he brakes into the hairpin, and now Alonso also enjoying the updates that Lance Stroll was testing out as they did a back-to-back comparison yesterday in FP1.
So, Alice, I'm going to ask you something now. What people would have heard just on the in-car camera was from Fernando Alonso's car as he went through the S's, and it was just sort of on accelerator, off accelerator, turning, braking and everything. But now I know you've not driven the S's at Suzuka, but you have driven Beckett's, for example. Can you explain to people, it just looks like someone's lifting and turning and lifting and turning. Can you explain to people what's actually going on in the car, what you're balancing as a driver as you're going through a demanding technical section like that, which is changing direction all the time?
So it all depends on car balance. So Alonso's there is on the hard tyre at the moment, so that's the hardest compound available. And if you want to try and get a bit of rotation in the car, you haven't only got your steering wheel to play with, you've obviously got your pedals as well, so you can sometimes have a sharp lift or a stab at the brake. I very much doubt he was having a stab at the brake, but that can be an option just to get the rear of the car to come round and get that corner rotation, that entry rotation. You can also just balance the throttle, so if you're struggling a little bit with the rear of the car, having those stabs of the throttle is really not going to help the balance. So you'd want to have a nice bleed off of the throttle and a really balanced throttle, not an aggressive lift, because you want to keep the car nice and settled when you go through or when you turn into the corner. So all depends with car balance. A lot of people think, well, surely you just push one pedal and use the other pedal, but there's a lot that goes on. You know, there's so many tools. You've even got, for example, in the higher braking zones, your brake bias can play such a huge part, as we just see a replay, and that's what I was trying to look in earlier. If you guys saw me leaning into the TV, Max Verstappen, almost like something was stuck on a part of his car there, so he was just trying to remove something by sticking his hand out of the cockpit, travelling at over 180 mile an hour, just as you casually do on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday morning UK time. But so many aids, and brake bias, for those that don't know, it basically is the brake balance. So usually in most cars you go clockwise to put more bias towards the front, so a bit more bite at the brakes at the front, and then rearwards is anti-clockwise, so more bite at the rear. Usually you go rearwards for racing when it's wet, so if the track's wet you'll put your brake bias further to the rear, and then you'll go further forward when it's dry.
And the drivers love that section so much because it's kind of like a dance, right? Because the car's always sliding, always on the edge of adhesion, and you're the person who's controlling its pivoting through that sort of section, like a sort of skid pan almost, which people don't realise because it's dry, but that's effectively what's going on, right? Effectively.
And you want to be so smooth because you want to keep up your minimum speed. Certainly here at Suzuka, because it is uphill. Maggots Beckett's at Silverstone is fairly flat, so you want to try and make sure you get your exit all the way up that hill, because then effectively you're flat out all the way through turn 7, effectively then to turn 8 here at Suzuka. So you want to try and get your exit and be nice and smooth. So you really want nice and smooth inputs, just not to scrub that speed. But as you said, Andrew, I've not been through this section. I've not had the opportunity to. One day, hopefully. But going through Maggots Beckett's, when you do get it right and the car is on the edge, it's just an incredible feeling just driving a race car through a section of track like that, especially a car that's got a lot of grip. Like you said, you are dancing with it, and sometimes it's just a nice gentle dance, other times it can be quite aggressive.
As Lando Norris dances up through that part of the track as well, making his way now into Degner 2. He's out there on the soft compound tyre. I've just been having a look at some of the times, especially those that were set a little bit earlier. And Yuki Tsunoda on the soft compound tyre in the RB, he's having a decent session so far. Yet again as well, he was in the top 10 in FP1. The Japanese driver was one of 2 Japanese drivers in FP1 with Ayumu Iwasa, the Super Formula driver and former Formula 2 driver, the Red Bull Junior, getting a chance in place of Daniel Ricciardo, who had to sit out that session. But Tsunoda at the moment, so far looking quite comfortable, has never scored a point in his home race so far, hoping to put that right come Sunday. Ricciardo, his teammate, obviously is on the back foot, having lost FP1 to Iwasa and of course really FP2 due to the rain. But once again, Tsunoda has the upper hand.
Ricciardo's had that spin, of course, on the exit of turn 2, but he's just not, it's not clicking for Ricciardo this year so far, is it? Everyone coming into this was sort of saying, well, he's happy that he's got a build-up of a season, a pre-season. Effectively, of course, he didn't have that last season because he was just a reserve driver. His seat had ended early with McLaren, and he was sort of sat on the sidelines. Of course, he still would have been training, but there's nothing quite like taking part in the pre-season test and conditioning your body to a race car. That's the best form of training you can do for your body, is actually driving the car itself. He didn't have that opportunity, but of course he did this year, and it's just not gone right for him. He's always been trailing behind Yuki Tsunoda, who I think is having a great season so far. and it's almost like Tsunoda can sort of smell blood at the sister team. He's hovering around the Perez seat, possibly the Verstappen seat. Who knows? With this Horner situation that we've got going on, but he'll be wanting to really, really prove himself. And actually, I think he's doing a pretty good job. As you said, he's up there in P7 at the moment and showing Daniel Ricciardo certainly the way.
Yeah, certainly is. Daniel Ricciardo, who stayed out after a tough Melbourne race in Australia, spent some time at home in Perth, seeing friends and family, and he will actually get, they're trying to change as many things as they can on that car to make Ricciardo feel more comfortable, and he is going to get a new chassis in China to see if that might suddenly unlock anything for Ricciardo. And of course, China will also be the first of the sprint races that we'll get as well, so we'll only get another single FP1 session there too, so it's a lot to try and cram into not a lot of practice time for them. But Tsunoda down in 7th, Ricciardo down in 12th as it currently stands, and RB embroiled in that what will be a fierce fight, I'm sure, for really it'll be 6th in the constructors, won't it, because those bottom 5 teams are all vying for just the last couple of points paying positions at best. Really, it's a 10th place if you're lucky and nobody retires from the top 5 teams or nobody has a tricky race. So your RB currently have 6 points. They're only 2 ahead of Haas, and Williams, Sauber and Alpine don't have any points at the moment. Oscar Piastri, meanwhile, taking rally to the extreme on the exit of the second Degner. The rear kicks out. This is the sound of it. Turns into the right-hander, runs a little bit out wide, loses the rear. On board, it doesn't actually look that chaotic, but off board, certainly looking like he was battling hard to keep that McLaren pointing in the straight direction. Yeah,
birthday boy Oscar taking a bit of skateboarding there. He was sliding across that curb. Not a very comfortable ride for him there, but managed to keep it on track. Good job, because it's quite easy. If you do just get it slightly wrong on the exit there, it's so easy to spit you off right, and then before you know it, the barrier is pretty much eating up your car. As the signs you can hear now is on board with Charles Leclerc out there on the medium tyre. He's not set a lap time on the softs yet. A tribute helmet, a nice tribute helmet to his good friend Jules Bianchi.
Yeah, just to be clear about their relationship, Jules Bianchi was Charles Leclerc's godfather, and their families were very close. He wasn't that much older than him to be a godfather. It wasn't a generational gap, but Charles Leclerc's dad and Jules Bianchi's dad were friends, and Jules Bianchi was on the Ferrari driver program when Charles Leclerc's family ran out of money, basically, when he was about 10, 11, 12 in karting. And Bianchi recommended to Nicholas Todd, the son of Jean Todt, the former FIA president and Ferrari boss, who was Bianchi's manager, that Leclerc was someone who he should take into his management stable as well. And it was Nicholas Todd who kept Charles Leclerc's career going, and then before long his talent did the rest for him. And he sees himself, Charles Leclerc, as basically continuing a legacy he believed Bianchi would have had he not been killed at Suzuka 10 years ago in that terrible accident at Dunlop in the rain, when he went off and hit a tractor vehicle that was recovering from the car.
Yeah, 10 years ago at Suzuka, as you say, and Bianchi's helmet from his Marussia days as he was back then, being replicated by Charles Leclerc for this weekend's racing. Bianchi raced for the Marussia team, as you say, part of the Ferrari Driver Academy, did a lot of testing for Ferrari, was touted as the next Ferrari driver, and also Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly paying tribute to their French compatriot as well. So Jules Bianchi, very much a name and a man that is missed from the Formula One paddock, and Leclerc honouring that on the sad anniversary, 10 years on from that fatal collision. Out on track, 21 minutes and 35 seconds remain. We're still quite in the thick of some long running pace after yesterday's delayed FP2 session kind of meant we didn't really see what anyone has got. A lot of unknowns still being answered. Hamilton is currently fastest for Mercedes. He set that lap time on the soft compound tyre on a 1:30.0, and this is relatively encouraging from Hamilton so far, especially after his comments after FP1, saying it was a really good session, best the car has felt all year. His teammate George Russell, in fact, Mercedes are currently bookending the timing screens at the moment. Russell has only been out on the medium compound tyre, I believe, and he's plumb last at the moment. I imagine we haven't seen anything from Mercedes reporting any kind of issue, so I imagine he's just been fully focusing on some long run pace and tyre degradation, because we are expecting deg to be fairly high round here. It usually can be quite hard on the tyres, most commonly a two-stop strategy, and hearing after free practice one that especially the qualifying tyre, that soft compound tyre, you're really going to get one shot on it before the tyre's lost its life. So certainly a lot of knowledge trying to be understood in the last 20 minutes of this session, as Oscar Piastri comes into the pit lane and is greeted by his mechanics. Ferrari looking fast after FP1 at the moment. Where are they? They're down. Sainz is 10th, Leclerc in 6th. I think it was Helmut Marko, the motorsport advisor for Red Bull, who was saying that Leclerc's long run pace was a little bit irritating, i.e. it was really fast after FP1. So perhaps Red Bull looking over their shoulder a little bit at Ferrari after FP1 at least. Possibly, but I think Red Bull certainly seem the dominant force, the stronger of those two cars at the moment. And we're talking about Lewis Hamilton's pace. Okay, it was set fairly early on in the session, but so was Max Verstappen's time. But Hamilton's only just over a tenth quicker than Max Verstappen. So I'm expecting Max Verstappen, when he does bolt on that set of soft tyres, hate to spoil it for you, Harry, he will obliterate, I'm guessing, Lewis Hamilton's time. Hamilton's done 15 laps completed so far. Max Verstappen 17 laps, all of those set on the medium tyre. And who's topping the most laps? It's the Ferraris at the moment. Leclerc and Carlos Sainz sharing the spoils with 19 laps each. Now, I'll tell you where there's a lot of talk at the moment. Obviously, Hamilton is off to Ferrari next year. That leaves a coveted seat at Mercedes. They may be struggling a little bit at the moment, but it's still a coveted seat. Who will be in the cockpit alongside George Russell? There's talks of the Mercedes protege in Formula 2, Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Also, will Max Verstappen stay? Oh, you beat me to it. There we go. You beat me. I was doing the big build-up. All right, we'll go straight there then. Andrew Benson, could we see a Sebastian Vettel return on the cards? Zero chance of Sebastian Vettel driving a Mercedes next year. Zero chance. Why? Because they're in order. Their driver choices are Max Verstappen, if they can get him out of Red Bull in the sort of midst of the Horner controversy fallout, which Max Verstappen is not happy about, I can tell you, even though he hasn't quite said that publicly. Option number 2 is Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who's the 17-year-old protege who's just started his first Formula 2 season and looks pretty promising already. And option number 3 is Fernando Alonso. And why would you take Sebastian Vettel over any of those 3 people? You wouldn't. Because he loves the bees. Yeah, Buzzin Corner, his biodiversity project that he launched last year at this track on the inside of Turn 1, housing the bees. Do you think, though, Sebastian Vettel, he's 36, been out of the sport year and a bit now, actually recently took part in a hypercar test in the World Endurance Championship with Porsche. Is he looking for a way back? Could we see him back in any kind of sense in Formula 1, do you think, as a driver? I don't think so. I mean, if someone's going to ask you, you're not going to say no. You're not going to burn your bridges, are you, and say, no, I'm not coming back? Because I know he has been asked the question and he didn't say no, but I can't, as much as I like Sebastian Vettel and all the work that he does off track, I can't
see him coming back into Formula One.
I can't really either. I mean, look, he was doing a promotional tour for some drink that he's trying to sell earlier this week, and he did the tour of various radio stations, including the BBC. And obviously people asked him about a comeback, like why wouldn't they? And he said he did say he was thinking about it, but it wasn't his priority. But I think you've got to flip it around the other way and say, why would a team want to take Sebastian Vettel at the moment? Now I know that sounds a bit dismissive and disrespectful perhaps to some people, but he's in his late 30s now. He wasn't exactly pulling up trees when he was in the last part of his career in Formula One. He arguably could and should have won the championship with Ferrari in 2017 and or 2018 and made too many mistakes. When you compare his performance at Aston Martin in his last 2 years against Lance Stroll with Fernando Alonso's performance against Lance Stroll, Alonso is light years faster than Vettel was compared to Stroll. I'll give you the numbers if you want. We did it on the podcast the other day. But in 2021, Vettel was on average 0.13 seconds quicker than Stroll in qualifying. In 2022, Vettel was on average 0.04 seconds quicker than Stroll in qualifying. Admittedly, maybe his motivation had gone a bit that year. And in 23 last year, Fernando Alonso was 0.398 seconds. So more than 2.5 tenths quicker than Vettel compared to Stroll, Alonso. Now, that confirms an opinion I had, a bias, whatever people might want to call it, that when they were battling as great rivals through the sort of years in 2010 and 2012, I always felt Alonso was a better driver than Vettel. It's just that Vettel had a better car. And I know that most people in Formula One felt the same. Lots of fans out there don't agree, and obviously Vettel's numbers are better than Alonso's in his career, but obviously it depends on what car you're driving a lot of the time in Formula One. And so, there's Ferrari are full. Red Bull, is Vettel going to go back to Red Bull? No, I don't think so. It doesn't leave that. McLaren are full. That only leaves the seat at Aston Martin open. If Alonso leaves, Carlos Sainz is on the market, performing at a very high level at Ferrari. You've got to question Vettel's motivation. It doesn't add up, does it? Let's be honest.
And he's got a drink to sell. It's the other reason that he's been back in the news as well. Let us know if you're up and awake. Hashtag BBC F1. Would you like to see a Vettel come back in Formula One? The other names you mentioned, though, but that Mercedes are looking at, in the top three: Verstappen, Antonelli, Alonso. I mean, Alice, they're all quite punchy names, aren't they, to be touted about to have in your second seat alongside George Russell. I would argue either one of those names would make for one of the most exciting lineups on the grid. Yeah, no, they certainly would. Of course, Max Verstappen at the top of any people's list, I'm sure. If they could pick any driver at the moment on the grid out there to drive their car. But Antonelli doing great things in Formula 2. He's actually skipped Formula 3, so he's come straight from the Formula Regional Championship, which is just a level in between F4 and F3, and has opted to skip the traditional F3 F2 route, and he's gone straight into F2 and doing good things. He actually was showing Ollie Behrman quite considerably distance, actually, the way round last time out for F2 in Melbourne. So he's a big talent, and I know very good friends with Toto Wolff. Goes on trips away with the Wolff family, so he's certainly right in there, and of course a Mercedes junior driver as well. Yeah, and he's set for his maiden F1 test, Antonelli, this year at the Red Bull Ring in Austria later this month. A 2-day test in the 2021 car, expected to be the first of several outings, including some FP1 rookie sessions as well, I'm sure, with Mercedes. And I'd be surprised if he doesn't get a running with Williams as well. Maybe even Aston Martin too, with the Mercedes powered teams running the Mercedes junior driver.
We're just seeing the drivers go out for their soft tyre runs. Alex Albon and the Williams have just gone up to 6th. This is soft tyre lower fuel runs, I should say. Just to finish off on Antonelli, he is really, really highly regarded. He's like, people think of him as potentially the next Max Verstappen, and he's not won a race in F2 yet, but if you've been looking closely at F2, he's already looking impressive after just 3 races. As Alice was saying, he showed Ollie Behrman the way in Australia, and actually in They were very close in qualifying in Bahrain too, and I think he out-qualified him, didn't he, there, even though they were struggling at Prema.
Yes, in Bahrain.
And in Jeddah, although Behrman was on pole and Antonelli was 5th, I think, it was only one lap, and on that one lap Antonelli made one big mistake in one corner. So he's basically on Behrman's pace, if not ahead of it already in his debut season. Russell's going through the Degnas. He's 3/10 down after the first sector on this lap. And over the winter, he did some F3 tests at Silverstone in the wet, alongside some pretty good high-level sort of F3, F2 drivers, while people giving their hand in the Carlin sort of junior driver. Keep your hand in team, and he absolutely blew them away in the wet. 4 seconds quicker he was, having never been to Silverstone before. So those sorts of performances, I guess, only a test, but they were back to backing the cars in similar conditions. They're the sort of things that make people, their eyes sort of pop open and think this guy's got something special.
If Antonelli doesn't get the Mercedes seat next year, do you think he'll still pop up on the grid somewhere else?
I think so.
Where do you think that will be?
Possibly at the Williams seat alongside Albon, as George Russell tops the times now. First driver in this session to break into the 129s, 129.918, a tenth and a half faster than Lewis Hamilton. But Max Verstappen now, this is what we've been waiting for. He is out on the soft tyre, not fastest in the first sector. That's Lando Norris, who's just gone purple in the first sector. But yeah, I can certainly see Antonelli popping up somewhere on the grid, 100%, Harry.
Yeah, I think the consensus is most likely if Mercedes do opt for Verstappen or Alonso over Antonelli in that second seat in Mercedes, he'll go to Williams perhaps as part of a deal there.
Bear in mind that James Bowles, the Williams team principal, was Mercedes young driver development director effectively. That was part of his remit as strategy director at Mercedes before he left to go to Williams, so he knows all about Antonelli.
Exactly there. Well, certainly one to keep an eye out and a name to look out for. Max Verstappen crosses the line with 9 minutes remaining as we're really getting into these low fuel soft tyre runnings now. The quick running ahead of qualifying later this afternoon. Max Verstappen fastest, a 1:29.563, 3.5 tenths clear of George Russell. Lewis Hamilton on another lap at the moment, just making his way round the final corner now. He's currently 3rd fastest, personal best in the middle sector. Does improve his time, but stays in 3rd, a 1:30.0 for Hamilton.
Now, Lando Norris has bailed on this lap. He did an absolutely blistering first sector, as Alice mentioned, which is perhaps not that big a surprise because the McLaren is great in fast corners, and that's why they thought they would be more relatively competitive in Japan than they have been at some other races this year. But obviously something must have happened for Norris in having done the S's. Maybe he made a mistake at Degner, and I guess he'll have to go again. Meanwhile, Oscar Piastri is about to come to the end of the second sector on his flying lap. So, Harry, you can take it from there.
He certainly has as he approaches the fast left-hander of 1:30. Personal best in the middle sector. The fastest sector one belonged to Lando Norris on that last lap around before he bailed out. But Piastri, the birthday boy, turns 23 today.
The ride of the car is certainly a lot worse.
As Verstappen complains about the ride of his car, Piastri crosses the line and goes 6th fastest. Stays 6th fastest, I should say. Improves his time, 6 tenths down on Max Verstappen. So couldn't beat his teammates that time from earlier. Norris 6th, Piastri 7th. So perhaps the final sector not playing ball for the McLarens as it currently stands. We're just about to see a replay of Norris and whether he did make a mistake on his lap. Coming out of the second Degner, and he absolutely did. Ran wide out of the second Degner. Andrew Benson, top marks for that.
He's
one.
on fire today.
And running over the little bit of AstroTurf they have there, which if you do go out that far wide, the tyres get dyed green all of a sudden. So Norris's front left and rear left suddenly getting a coating of green Astro on them as he makes his way back around on the track.
I love Suzuka. It's just great, isn't it?
It's everybody's favourite. There isn't no one. I've never come across anybody who has a bad word to say about it.
That in-car sequence of Alonso that I got you to talk about, Alice, that was just great. And then the McLaren struggling at Degner, just absolutely love this track.
And it makes a brilliant case as to why these types of tracks must stay on the calendar at a time where Formula One is increasingly going to street tracks with not a lot of runoff. We need these circuits.
We do. I mean, I'm a big fan of street tracks as well. Certainly those that don't have loads of runoff, like your Singapore. But just one thing to note, Max Verstappen was on the radio saying all of a sudden the drivability's got a lot worse. I've been keeping an eye on our screens here in the comms box, and I've noticed that the wind direction is changing quite a lot throughout certainly the last 10 minutes, and the wind speed is a bit up and down, so possibly that could be affecting the feel of the cars, and not what you want in a high-speed circuit. The winds suddenly, especially gusty winds, and often actually you get that a lot at Silverstone. You'll be going through Copse Corner, which is turn 9 at Silverstone, the fast right-hander, and I've certainly been through there on several occasions where one lap it feels fine, then all of a sudden you'll get a English gust of wind and the car feels absolutely dreadful, and that's probably what the drivers are experiencing here through this circuit, as now Lando Norris heads through the first sector, just a bit shy off what he set earlier, but still looking fairly decent from the McLaren driver.
Yeah, it doesn't run out wide this time around on the exit of Degner 2. And just to finish off the chat on Suzuka's the track, of course they signed an extension coming into this season, so Suzuka will remain on the calendar until 2029. So that is good to see and encouraging. 5 minutes to go then of this final practice session ahead of qualifying later today, and you can hear that live on 5 Sports Extra. We'll be on air from 5 to 7 in the morning ahead of the session starting at 7 o'clock on the dot. So have your cup of tea ready for that one. We're getting a little inkling as to what qualifying might bring us in these last few moments, with the soft tyre, the quickest rubber being fitted to the cars, running low fuel. Norris comes across the line, improves his lap time, doesn't improve his position. A 1:31 for Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri about a tenth behind him. In fact, they've just been split by the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, who puts himself up into 7th. This is the sound of his teammate who comes across the line, down in 10th at the moment. 4 minutes remaining. It's Verstappen ahead of Perez, Russell, Hamilton, Alonso the top 5, then Norris, Sainz, Piastri, Tsunoda, Leclerc the top 10. Bit curious there from the McLarens and the Ferraris there on these low fuel runs right at the end. The pace doesn't quite seem to be as fast as we expected. No, if Ferrari have opted to run low fuel, maybe they don't want to show all their cards just yet. But interesting from Norris, and maybe that touches back on what Andrew was saying earlier on in the session. He is fastest in that first sector, and it was an impressive first sector. But of course he made that mistake at the second Degners and went off track. Maybe, and it is often with high degradation circuits and circuits that certainly take a lot out of the tyres, that was it for having another lap, because he obviously did back off.
I keep losing my left mirror.
So Perez complaining about his mirror. First it was Max Verstappen having vibration mirrors, not doing his hair, of course, checking out from the cars behind. But mirror issues there. But just back to Lando Norris, he probably took, that was his tyres done. You know, once you've gone off and you've taken the peak out of those tyres, especially the soft tyres at high deg circuits, you know deep down, okay, this is going to be hard for me to really make any significant improvement now I've gone off track and now I've sort of taken the peak out of that tyre. As Andrew said again, it's one lap, the drivers said, they've got on these soft tyres, and you've got to make it count.
That could be really spicy for qualifying later as well. If you run a little bit wide out of Degner and ruin your lap, then you really might not get another chance to put in that competitive lap time. So it's shaping up quite nicely for qualifying. It does look like it is once again going the way of Max Verstappen and Red Bull, who are bouncing back after the retirement for Verstappen with the brake issues that he experienced in Melbourne, which caused him to have an early bath that time around. With 2 minutes to go, he currently has the fastest lap time, 1:29.5. Although, funnily enough, he doesn't have any of the fastest sector times. It's Norris who's fastest in Sector 1. Russell has the fastest middle sector. And Alex Albon, after a struggling day so far for the two Williams drivers, both complaining. Albon especially reporting no confidence within his Williams. They've been in the garage for quite a while in this session, in the middle of it, working away on both cars, and Albon back out there and feeling more comfortable. He's currently 11th fastest overall, but fastest in that final sector. Teammate Sargent, though, still down in 19th place, only ahead of Kevin Magnussen. Magnussen's teammate for Haas is Nico Hülkenberg. Both drivers expecting tough weekends this weekend I should say, especially with the high-speed corners and the fast direction changes in that Sector 1. Just the balance of that Haas car so far hasn't been quite right for either Hülkenberg and Magnussen, who've had a terrific start to the year so far, with points finishes, a double points finish last time around in Australia. Looking tough to try and replicate that again come Sunday, but still a way to go. This will be the last 30 seconds of practice before the competitive action begins in qualifying later on. Now, in FP1, Alice, we saw quite a lot of traffic issues, didn't we? Coming out of the pit lane, also backing up into that final chicane and sector. Just saw one of the McLarens in the RB as well, sort of scrapping a bit awkwardly over a bit of track coming through the Degners. Do you think that's going to be an issue in qualifying as well?
I think so.
Especially Q1, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say Q1 will mainly see that issue, as Lance Stroll is carbon copy pretty much of what Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri did, running slightly wide and then making his left-hand side tyres look a little bit mouldy for the next several corners. And is this going to be Nico Hülkenberg pretty much doing it? And that's what I mean. And Harry, if you just ride that curb slightly wrong and the bottom of the car effectively bottoms out on the crest of that curb there, Hülkenberg did a good job saving that, because he was quite rapidly, if not, heading into the tyre barrier or the Armco there on the right-hand side. But
yeah, that was coming out of the second Degner and just got pitched up onto the curb, didn't he? And nearly the rear, completely stepping out from beneath him.
Yeah, so it was a good save there, but the checker flag is now out to close this session. Charles Leclerc, the first driver to take the flag. And it's that man, Max Verstappen, top of the times, 2.5 tenths clear of Sergio Perez, then from George Russell, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso. Are you top 5?
Absolutely. Well, we came into this session with lots of unknowns, a little bit more understood ahead of qualifying later on this afternoon, but that is the last practice session ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix done and dusted, and it is a Red Bull 1-2. Max Verstappen fastest, a 1:29.563, 2 tenths ahead of Sergio Perez. The two Mercedes of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton are third and fourth, with Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin rounding out the top 5. Here is Leclerc.
So we got the checkered flag.
Honestly, I don't get it. What are we doing to stay in the garage? Oh my god. We have FP3, we have 2 laps. Let's be on it, come on.
I think you said Leclerc was first to take the flag. I think they obviously got their timing wrong, and he was trying to get a fast lap in before the end of the session.
Yeah, so they were the last, both Ferraris were the last 2 drivers to actually settle up. And actually, I did think at the time, I was thinking Ferrari are leaving this a little bit late. And Leclerc, like you said, Harry, clearly was hoping to do another lap of some sort as he's pulling up, so with several other drivers, onto the grid to do their practice starts. He was the first driver to take the checkered flag, so not particularly happy with his team there, making it fairly clear. Maybe signs of frustration, maybe what I said earlier of them possibly sandbagging a little bit is not 100% correct, because by the sounds of Charles Leclerc, we're going to hear from him again.
Are you sure I took the checkered flag?
Yes.
I just had the first time message in the radio.
Me too, when as we race.
So So Leclerc then just wanting to double check. He definitely took the flag, which he did, because that is the end of the session. So a bit of frustration then for Ferrari and Leclerc at the end of final practice. Verstappen, Perez, Russell, Hamilton, Alonso, the top 5. Norris, Sainz was 7th. Piastri, Tsunoda in his home Grand Prix, finishing that session in 9th. Charles Leclerc rounding out the top 10. Albon was 11th for Williams, ahead of Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber. Daniel Ricciardo in the other Albi was 13th. Esteban Ocon in the Alpine was 14th. Zhou Guanyu in the Sauber rounded out the top 15. Hulkenberg's Haas was 16th, ahead of the Alpine of Gasly. The other Aston Martin, who had an off in the exit of the second Degner on his final lap. Stroll was 18th in front of Sargent Williams, and Kevin Magnussen in the Haas rounded out the 20 drivers to take part in FP3. No major issues in that session, and trying to cram as much track time in as possible after missing FP2 yesterday. We will be back for qualifying, which you can hear on 5 Sports Extra from 7 o'clock in the morning. What are we expecting for that, Alice? What are your predictions?
No rain is forecast, so we're likely to get a fully dry session. Max Verstappen, he's looking pretty strong, isn't he, in that Red Bull? There could be a fight for second place. George Russell just a whisker behind Sergio Perez. I'm surprised with the Mercedes pace. They should be pretty happy with that. So I'm expecting, sadly to say, for those that aren't Max Verstappen fans, him to certainly be on pole position. But I think a nice little scrap between the final top 3 places.
Well, not long to wait until we see the true competitive order ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix. Qualifying coming up on 5 Sports Extra. Will be on air from 5 to 7, starting at 7 o'clock. We'll see you then. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.